Hey guys, Kidai Kino here. We're starting a mad dash to the finish as I try to conclude the binge before the release of Godzilla vs. Kong at the end of March, so I'm gonna try and be more concise with my thoughts on each film. First up we have Godzilla Tokyo SOS. Before this rewatch, I'd kinda taken to thinking of this film as a weaker sequel to Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, which is absolutely true if you compare them based on the former film's strengths. Against Mechagodzilla had an exceptionally strong human story, while Tokyo SOS doesn't really measure up, even if it is cool to see Hiroshi Koizumi back as Professor Chujo from the original Mothra. Yoshido kinda just has a very shallow reiteration of Akane's learning to respect Kiryu as a sentient being arc, but with none of the personal stakes. Akane's one scene here is the most poignant character moment in the film, and there's really nothing to it. Yumiko Shaku's performance and Michiro Oshima's music are doing all the work. That said, as I was rewatching it, I couldn't help noticing that this film is a lot stronger visually than its predecessor. Megaguirus, GMK, and Against were all shot by Masahiro Kishimoto, but Yoshinori Sekiguchi steps in as the new cinematographer for Tokyo SOS, along with new special effects director Eiichi Asada, a veteran of Toho's effects team who got his start in the 70s under Teruyoshi Nakano. Between these two, the drama unit cinematography and especially the monster action are noticeably improved over the previous film. Hell, for my money, this is the best Mothra has looked since her debut. Also, even if the characters are weaker, the build-up to the eventual convergence of Godzilla, Kiryu, and Mothra in Tokyo is pretty solid. Out of the two Kiryu films, I'd say Against Mechagodzilla is by far the better character piece, but Tokyo SOS is the better action film. Next, with the series' box office performance still declining despite the use of more popular monsters, Toho sends off Godzilla for the time being with a massive 50th anniversary blowout in Godzilla Final Wars. I can understand getting an up-and-coming hot-shit action director like Ryuhei Kitamura for a big event like this, but man does it make for an odd Godzilla movie. I tend to agree with his preference for the Champion Festival era of Godzilla over much of what had come since, and the unhinged monster wrestling qualities of the effect scenes, Eiichi Asada again, are pretty fun, to say nothing of all the Showa-era homages and returning cast members. I like all that. Everything else about this movie is an insane mess. There are just too many ideas, with info dumps coming right up until the climax where they're of no consequence beyond momentary changes in who has the upper hand. You've got 3 different composers, including an aging English progger and a Sum 41 single on the soundtrack. You've got lengthy martial arts action scenes that are more typical of Kitamura's other work. Most of the film is graded with aggressive tints that combine with the over-the-top costume design and frequent slow motion to make the whole thing feel almost like a music video. I guess at the end of the day, I have to concede that it is extremely memorable, and I loved this stupid movie so much when I was 12 that I can't bring myself to dislike it even today. You are not immune to nostalgia goggles. Speaking of which, next up we've got Peter Jackson's King Kong. Just to get it out of the way, yeah, the movie is too long, but I can appreciate the nuts on Peter Jackson to be making a movie that people were already gonna say was too long, and then throw the action set piece that got cut from the original for pacing reasons back in. I also appreciate how much Jackson obviously loves the original film. There's something touching about a guy reaching the stage in his career where nobody can tell him no, and then using that power to write an extremely sincere love letter to one of the films that inspired him. I'm not really anti-CGI, I do prefer practical creature effects generally, but with that said, the CGI creatures here are amazing, especially Kong. It's the composite shots that are a little weak though. You can kind of feel Jackson's Lord of the Rings background and how not only Skull Island but also Depression-era New York feel like fantasy settings here. You can also see him chasing a bit of that Titanic clout with some sunsets that are heightened like that. This right here looks like a Christian Facebook meme. Jack Black as an unscrupulous but truly driven denim is a great interpretation. Kong and Ann as a couple of misfits is a nice spin too. This movie, like Final Wars, is a bit messy, and I don't see myself revisiting it more than once every few years, but it's got an undeniable charm. It feels odd to call Gamera the Brave the best kaiju film in a decade that also saw the release of GMK and The Host, which we'll get to in a second, but I think it might be the most successful at what it sets out to do. It revives the child-focused approach of Showa Gamera, but in a more modern style. It feels like a Spielberg movie in a lot of ways. The kids in it have to come to grips with not only the fallibility of the adults in their lives, but with their own mortality, and the film depicts these struggles with a lot of heart, but without treating these subjects euphemistically. It's also just very well made. The small seaside town of Shima in Mie Prefecture, where much of the film takes place, is captured in rich, vivid detail, and while the digital effects are uneven, the practical effects are excellent. The young Gamera, Todo, is perhaps cuter than he needed to be, but you get used to it. And I can't forget the cast. The authority figures are played a bit broad for comedic purposes, as if acknowledging their presence as obligatory stock characters, but the parents are portrayed with a lot of nuance as flawed human beings who show equally deep love, care, and fear for their children, who are themselves probably the best bunch of child actors I've seen in a kaiju film. I can understand why this film is overshadowed by the Kaneko trilogy, but it really is a shame. Gamera the Brave is an underappreciated gem. And now on to the host. I think what stands out the most about this movie is that the monster is honestly one of the last things I think of when I remember this movie. The writing, cinematography, score, and performances are all great, and then they threw in a really sick monster on top of all that. It turns what would already be a great thriller into a great horror movie. Obviously, aside from the twist, the scenes dealing with the government and the public's response to news of a virus outbreak hit pretty different right now. It's also a solid criticism of class structure and US military presence in South Korea that doesn't make its political commentary its entire focus, but instead kinda delivers it incidentally by telling a smaller story within the framework of those systems. It has a fair amount in common with Bong Joon-ho's more recent Parasite, but I think what I'm saying is illustrated by the fact that while Parasite's ending focuses on the class aspirations of its protagonist, The Hosts is a more personal moment resolving a story that's been impacted along the way by class and imperialism. That's not to say one approach is inherently better than the other, it's just an interesting point of contrast, and I think it might be what enables The Host to take on the larger target of the American Empire so pointedly. Anyway, that's it for this episode. The next one will take place firmly within the wilderness years prior to what a lot of fans call the Kaiju Renaissance. We've got D-War, Cloverfield, 2 independent kaiju films from Japan, and a very odd follow-up to The X from Outer Space. Big thanks as always to my patrons, especially Bob Burns, Exploder Button, John Paneer, and Ryan Clark. You can join them in supporting this channel and my film preservation projects at the Patreon link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.